and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be walking you through a tutorial of how to gather using elastic, and I'm going to be using clear elastic. And this is just, I got this at Hobby Lobby. You can get some on Amazon or most craft stores have it. You can also use regular elastic, but that's just going to be a little bit bulkier. So I prefer the clear elastic because it just lays more comfortably. But I will be walking you through how to use this to get your gathers, and I love doing this method. I find it gives really nice even gathers without doing much work, and it's pretty quick compared to having to baste everything and gather it and even it out and do all of that. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so gathering with elastic is very simple. It's my favorite way to gather for the most part, and it usually gives really nice clean gathers. And so all you need is, you can use regular elastic, but I like to use clear elastic. It just isn't quite so bulky. But what we're going to do is we're just going to take our clear elastic. I like to use a Sharpie to mark on my elastic and then my skirt pieces. So the first thing we're going to do, I am gathering my skirt pieces separately, so it's not in the round, so I'm doing each piece individually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my elastic. You want to stretch it out. You want to do this with all elastic actually before you measure it. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to use my pattern piece. You could use your cutout piece, but I find it easier to just use the pattern piece because you don't have to worry about it stretching or anything. You just have exactly the right size you need. So I like to leave about 1 inch on the front and back of my elastic just for something to hold on to. So that's where I mark with my Sharpie. And then I'll pull it around my bodice piece. And while I have this out, since it has the center marking, I'm going to mark my center. And then the same thing, I'm going to wrap it around here and mark here. And I am not taking out the seam allowances because I do not need them. And I am going to write on this one a B so that I know it's the back, because this one, my back bodices and my front bodices are completely different. So I want to make sure I have the right elastic. So now I'm going to do my front bodice. I'm going to do the same thing. Pre-stretch that elastic. Put about 1 inch over, mark my starting point, take it around, mark my center, and take it around again and mark my end. And so if you were doing this in the round, which means your skirt pieces are sewn together already, you would do the same thing. You would just measure your bodice front and backs together, so this would then be one big long piece instead of 2 separate pieces. But now that we have our elastic measured, we're going to take our skirt pieces and we want to make sure we mark the top center, and I'm just going to use a washable marker here on the inside to mark my center points on the front and my back pieces. And again, some of your front and back pieces, depending on the pattern, will be identical, but like this pattern, the front and back bodices and the front and back skirt pieces are different. So you just want to make sure you keep your elastics correct. And also, like if you're doing it in the round, you would want to mark on your elastic your bodice pieces, like for this pattern, because if you just marked in quarters and you tried to use the side seams, you're not going to get the same measurement because your elastics or your bodices are different lengths on their front and back. So you just want to make sure you pay attention to that and make sure your markings are accurate for your pattern pieces. Okay, so this is one of my skirt pieces. I have my elastic that is the correct piece for this skirt, and I'm going to start off by, I made those markings on my elastic, so if you did not do those yet, you will need to do those, and those are based off of your bodice piece. You want to find the middle and your ends. If you are doing, this is a youth size 5, so this is a smaller scale. If I'm doing an adult, I may find quarter points as well, just to give me a little bit more of a guidance, and it's kind of hard if you have like 2 feet between notches to make sure you're stretching it evenly. So you may want to add more marks on your skirt and elastic, but it's definitely up to you. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my center mark of my elastic with the center mark I made on my skirt, and we're going to line the elastic up right on the raw edge of our fabric. And then I'm going to take my end point and line that up. And the reason I like to leave a little bit is so that when you're feeding it through, you have something left to pull on, because otherwise sometimes it'll pull it in and it'll end up coming out short. But then I'm just going to come over here to the front and do the same thing and line those up and clip them. And so you can see here I have all of this extra fabric between my clips, which is perfect because that is what's going to get gathered. So what I'm going to do now, once I have this, is I am going to go over to my sewing machine. I'm going to set my stitch to the longest stitch length I have on a wide zigzag stitch. So I am going to go ahead and do that, and I will take you over to my machine with me. As I said, my longest stitch length is a 4, so I have my stitch length set to a 4. I need to set my stitch to a zigzag because I did not do that. So I have it set to just a basic zigzag and the widest width on my machine, which is a 5. What we're going to do is we are going to take our skirt piece with the elastic on it, and we are going to put it under the machine. I like to kind of pin it a little bit ahead if I need to, because that'll hold it in place just to get it set under my presser foot. And you want to make sure that your marking on your elastic is still lined up with the edge of your skirt, and the top of the elastic is lined up with flush with your raw edge. It's not overlapping at all. When I say overlapping, it's going to line up just to make sure we know, like this. So I know it's hard to see, but you don't want it coming off of your fabric. So you want it lined up here and the raw edge lined up with the edge of your elastic. So I'm going to get this set up under my presser foot, and the elastic will go back behind just a little bit, and that's just to give me something to hold on to. So I will start by just, I can take this out now, putting in a few stitches to kind of tack it down. And then what I'm going to do is I want to grab this tail of my elastic, and I am going to hold on to my next point of elastic and stretch it out. Sometimes I like to just kind of stretch it and find a middle point and hold on there, just so I have a little bit less of wiggle room. So I'm going to make sure that this edge stays lined up with my elastic, and then I'm going to hold on to the tail of my elastic, and I am not going to fight my feed dogs, but I'm going to pull this so I want to pull equal amounts on the back as I am on the front, and I'm just going to help it feed through. So if you are to pull only on your front, it's not going to feed through. It's going to fight those feed dogs, and it's going to kind of stick. So what pulling on it does is helps it feed through evenly. So you can see it's starting to gather that up back here. And then once I get to where I'm holding it, I will just stop and readjust, grab onto another part, and then I like to grab onto kind of about an inch or so behind my skirt and do the same thing. I will pull the elastic. You want to pull it so that your fabric is flat. You don't need your fabric stretched, but you also don't want your fabric bunched up. So that is pulling your fabric and elastic taut, and the same thing in the back. And I'll stop right there. And so over here, I'm going to do the same thing. So this is where kind of those quarter points could be helpful instead of, I'm kind of just finding that quarter point now, or just kind of a random point, but your quarter points would be helpful for that if you feel that you'd need those. So you just keep going, and you just want to keep making sure that your elastic is lining up with the edge of your fabric. And so now here I am at the end, and I have this little tail that I kept. I'm going to keep my marking lined up with the edge of my skirt, and I'm just going to hold on to that and kind of press it down and feed it through. So now my fabric is all the way under, but I still had this little tail that I was able to hold on to keep this gathering all the way to the end. All right, so once you have finished that, now look at that. You can see just how nice that gathered and how even. And you can see here's the back. It just looks really beautiful and super even, which is why it's my favorite way to do it. It kind of just evens it out for you, and you don't really have to worry about that. But once you have your skirt piece gathered, then you're going to just take your bodice, and you should have the same size as your bodice if you measured your elastic correctly. All you're going to do is I'm just going to take my elastic, right sides together here, and I do have a lining on this one, so you want to make sure your bodice pieces are lined up. And I'm just going to line up my edges, and I will clip that on all the way around. And we should get a nice matchup right at the end. And then so once you have that clipped on or pinned or however you choose, you will go over. I am going to attach this with my serger, so I'm going to go over and sew this on. I like to do it with my gathered piece on the top so that I can kind of lay it out and make sure my gathers are nice and flat going through. But I will take you over to my serger and show you how I do that as well. All right, I am over here. I am attaching this with a serger. You could do this on a regular machine with some sort of stretch stitch. But using my serger, this pattern calls for a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is about the length of the elastic. And I did fail to mention this earlier, but if it's like a 1/2 inch seam allowance or so, you may need to move your elastic down and attach that at 1/2 inch seam allowance, especially if you are attaching it with a serger, because you don't want to cut off your elastic. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, making sure all of my pieces are lined up here. I like to have my gathers on the top so that I can kind of lay them out and hold them down so I can make sure they're laying flat. And I am just going to sew here. And I am not really going to be cutting anything off, again, because this is a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you have a different seam allowance on your pattern, then you will need to use what is written in your pattern. But what I'm going to do is just hold this on there and line it up, and I do not want to cut my elastic. So my edge of my elastic, which should be about the edge of my fabric, is going to go in just inside of my knife. And this should fit perfectly onto your bodice, so we don't need to do any stretching or pulling of your skirt or your bodice to make it lay nicely. But you do just want to make sure that your raw edges are sticking out, because sometimes depending on if you got your stitch a little bit too close to the edge, it could curl under, and we don't want that when we stitch. So we're just going to, again, flatten out our gathers. So what this is doing is, if you are using a serger, you are encasing the elastic in there. So once it's sewn, you really won't even be able to see that this elastic is even there. So you have that sewn on, and now you can not see, you don't even see that elastic at all because it is all enclosed in your seam. I hope that you found this tutorial helpful for gathering, and I hope you give it a try if you have not. This is the finished garment that I did gathering with the elastic, and I just wanted to show you the end result of how beautiful those gathers look and how even they are, which is why I love gathering with clear elastic. And as I mentioned, you can find clear elastic at most craft stores or on Amazon. I'll put a couple down in the description below for you to check out, and you can kind of pick from those or wherever else you may go. There's really not a right or wrong, but I hope you give this method a try, and if you do, make sure you let me know in the comments, and then give this video a like and subscribe to my channel for any future videos. Bye!